Technology and poetry, how technology can hinder or enhance how we access and create poems. In her article, Teaching Poetry in High School, published in 1926, Clara Horn laments the average high school pupil's indifference to poetry, which in some instances amounts to positive distaste or contempt. Her belief is that the fault for this lies mostly with teachers, whose focus is mostly on explaining a poem rather than appreciating it. Psychologist Robert A. Shaw agreed with Horn in his article, Psychology, Technology, and Poetry. In 1984, according to his English teacher friend, students were still not interested in poetry, and he examines at length why that could be. His main conclusion is simply that in school, students are instructed to think logically using the scientific method. Furthermore, Shaw points out that cognitive psychologists make models of the brain's processes which, quote, resemble flowcharts for a computer program. This leads to people thinking of the mind as if it were an actual computer and believing our minds have to think this way. This way of thinking is in direct conflict with the way poetry demands we process information. According to Shaw, there are three ways in which poetry processes information. First, poetry juxtaposes categories that don't typically go together. Second, poetry communicates information in a sparse fashion. Third, poetry attaches feeling to the concepts it evokes. Due to these characteristics of poetry, many people see poetry as an alien, sometimes threatening way of thinking. Shaw notes, however, that technology is starting to mirror poetry in many ways. Split screens being used in cinema and TV allows different media to show several ideas at the same time, just like poetry does. Computer terminals have multiple windows, delivering many sets of information at once, and CPUs are capable of processing more than one task at a time. In 1984, this specific concept was new. How does technology enhance our experiences with poetry? In 2015, Toby Emmerich assisted a classroom teacher in a 2-week instructional unit that integrated poetry and digital storytelling tools, essentially using technology to excite the otherwise uninterested 9th graders about writing and presenting their own poetry. By the end of their assignment, the students were more engaged, better versed in different poetry writing techniques, and excited about creating short films to accompany their works. I believe that technology enhances our ability to access and enjoy poetry, both as readers and creators. Since technology has existed, creatives have been looking for exciting, innovative ways to incorporate it in their art. Modern poets may use digital photos or videos to enhance a poem, record themselves reading the poem to play while users read the poem from a computer screen, or create simple online books of poetry readers can download and enjoy at their own pace in the palm of their hand. One prime example of this type of poetry is in the age of social media. Do you know any social media poets? When I say social media poet, does anybody come to mind? Did you ever post a poem online? How did you do this, and why? First personal experience with online poetry was around the year 2000. It didn't take long for me to find social chat sites and apps like AIM and ICQ, and online journaling outlets like LiveJournal and Diaryland. Outside of that, my exposure to poetry on the internet has been very limited. However, when I began using Twitter last year, I realized the platform was often used by writers to share their works. Because a tweet can only be 280 characters, these works were often shared in long threads. Sometimes they're narratives, other times they read like a live-action play-by-play of a fictional event, creating more suspense with each tweet. One author who used Twitter specifically to publish her work is Melissa Broder, who became well known as the anonymous person behind Twitter account @SoSadToday. Eventually, she'd compile her tweets into a book of essays and went on to write novels. Broder's popularity came from, as B.D. McClay states, the fact that Broder's Twitter persona concealed as much as it revealed, capturing how so many of us communicate on social media. Instagram is another unlikely place for poetry to thrive. When I think of Instagram, I think first of very pretty photographs, images uploaded of one-of-a-kind artwork, and food pictures. As noted by Ivan Salinas, millennials are paving the way for digital literature, from blog posts to fan fiction, and now posting poems and short stories on social media. The most popular poet on Instagram, according to Salinas, is Rupi Kaur. She is a social media force, and her popularity is unquestionable. She's turned her very personal, sometimes triggering poetry into an entire line of products through her use of Instagram. Not only does she perfect the ability to fit a poem into the space of a social media square, she evokes strong emotions from her readers and critics through the screen. She also publishes her poems as collections in books, which she has a hand in designing. Her doodles have become so popular that you can get them from the brand Inkbox as temporary tattoos, and she just released a live poetry reading event online. Another prominent social media poet is Elise Hart. She works in short-form poetry, which makes Instagram the perfect place for her to share her work with a wide audience. Her poems used to be easily identified by an anatomically correct heart stamped in the bottom right corner of each white square. Nowadays, she favors a neat border accent on the corners of her posts. Hart has said that using Instagram to post poetry has expanded her creativity. Thanks to the internet and social media, writers can be their own agents, thus being able to skip the saturated and exclusive world of publishing. This may have something to do with the hate that some internet poets get, namely Rupi Kaur. As Jayashree Kumar states for Vice, Kaur's non-traditional route to fame could be a reason she's so widely disliked. She self-published her first poetry collection while in college and didn't republish it with a publishing house until after one of her Instagram posts went viral. Still, others think her target demographic is cause enough for her to receive hate: young women. Quote, "This makes her ripe for ridicule. Like many pop musicians before her, she commits the sin of engaging with a demographic whose taste is often seen as a byword for bad quality. Push criticism of her actual writing aside, and Kaur is a victim of a toxic mix of snobbery and misogyny." Regardless, the industry is paying attention to what writers are doing on these platforms as they become a site for them to scout for talent and potential writers they could publish.